This is Voices of Customer Experience, a podcast where we bring you the very best thought leaders and practitioners of customer experience and its overlapping verticals, such as marketing, analytics, behavior economics, journey mapping, and design. Our goal is to help you be better at your job by listening to the experiences and leadership of others who, like you, have dedicated their careers to improving the dialogue between companies and customers. Voices of Customer Experience podcast is brought to you by Worthix, the first and only self-adaptive survey for measuring customer experience. Discover your worth at worthix.com. Adam Toporek is an internationally recognized customer experience expert, keynote speaker, and customer service trainer who helps organizations transform their relationships with their customers through better strategy, training, and communication. He's the author of Be Your Customer's Hero, the founder of the popular Customers That Stick blog, and the co-host of Crack the Customer Code podcast. He's also the creator of virtual training course How to Deal with Difficult Customers. Adam is regularly ranked as a top customer experience thought leader and has been cited in Entrepreneur, Forbes, AMA, and over 100 other media. Adam, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mary, James. I appreciate it, and I am excited.
Yeah, and here's James Conrad, my co-host,
hey,
my
Mary,
wingman.
Great to be back. Great to be back.
Great having you, James. Thank you so much for joining us today. Adam, you are a well-known figure in the customer experience community. I'm pretty sure that most of our listeners have heard about you and somehow either read or listened to something that you've worked on, some project. But tell if by any chance there's anyone who hasn't heard of your work yet and doesn't know about you, can you just give a brief intro to yourself and what you do and what your mission is in customer experience?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I am a third-generation entrepreneur, and I think that's one of the different lenses I tend to bring to customer experience. I grew up in and around small business. When I got to my working years, I started my own businesses, was in retail and franchising for a while, and really started seeing how important experience was and how it was such a driver for not only, customer loyalty and things like that, but for the overall experience in the organization and how you had to center things around experience. So eventually I started talking about it, blogging about it, and now I'm a keynote speaker, a customer service trainer, a strategic advisor, all on the topic of customer experience and customer service.
Well, you have a lot of initiatives that you work on. I mean, there's the book, Be Your Customer's Hero, is your most recent piece of work, right? In that regard?
Certainly my most recent book.
Right.
So, yes.
And then you also work on a podcast that you co-host, which is Crack the Customer Code. And you've been podcasting for a while, right?
Yes, absolutely. We have been, I think we're on episode around the time we're recording this, 350 something.
Wow.
Wow.
I know. So it's been a few years. I've been doing that. I've had the Customers That Stick blog. It was a different blog originally. I've had that since 2011. So yes, I've been talking about and putting out content on customer experience for a long time.
That's great. I always love podcasting with other podcasters because it seems to go really smoothly.
Well, I'm going to fix that, Mary, right now.
I did want to start off by talking about your book because your book touches on a very interesting topic that we've heard a lot in the previous season of this podcast, which is talking about frontline employees and how they're the face of the company. And regardless of all of this focus on the work that they do and the importance of their job representing the company to customers, there still seems to be a lot of mistakes that go on, and there are a lot of problems. It's probably the most delicate aspect of the experience. And I'm curious, since you've worked with companies, you speak about this all the time, I'm curious to understand what it is that always seems to kind of break in that process and what executives and leaders can do to mend that and make that a solid front of such an important touch point for customers.
It's simply a lack of focus. I mean, in the end, there's a million different reasons, but it comes down to a lack of focus and more accurately, a lack of making it a strategic priority. And let's back up and talk about why it's so important, because I think one of the reasons it gets lost, especially today, is we're 7 out of every 8 articles is about technology and customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, people actually dealing with your customers is so 2000,
Yeah.
right? But it's not. That's the catch. It isn't. And more importantly, I talk a lot about the emotional journey, customer emotion, how important it is. The research we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years really has shown us how much we are irrational creatures and emotional creatures, and how much our experience is not only defined by emotion, but the memory of emotion. And I would sort of contend that to take that a step further, in most cases, not every case, the most emotionally resonant experience you're going to have with an organization is going to be a human to human experiences.
Absolutely.
It is just how we are wired biologically, evolutionarily. We respond more deeply to other humans. Thus, if that's going to be the most emotionally resonant, it's also going to be often the most important. And despite all of this knowledge that I'm talking about right now, the human piece gets ignored so often in favor of technology, in favor of assuming that our teams know what to do, that they are somehow magically given the gift of great customer service at birth. And they're going to come in our organization, and then you're going to be surprised when they didn't know exactly what to say to that customer or how to handle that situation. And one of the ways I like to look at it is sort of going back to the psychology and the evolutionary biology is this. Anybody who's sort of a decent communicator and a good person who cares can be pretty good at proactive customer service. We are not wired for reactive, difficult situations. We're not wired to get yelled at, screamed at, and go, "Thank you, ma'am. I understand. I'd really love to help you."
Sure.
Right? And not only does it take training to manage our own emotions, but it takes training to know what to say in the face of the customer's emotion. And that is so often where organizations just fail. They simply don't put the time or the investment into training their teams and into making that a strategic priority.
Let me ask you something. And this is something that I could be totally wrong about. James, don't kill me. Because it's something that I've been working on in my head where lots of times you have call centers or, customer service departments in companies. And they tend to be, we're in the age of the internet and the memes. And it's almost become ironic of the way that we represent either telemarketers or customer service reps as being just like the worst possible job that somebody can have, right? So, it's like a punishment almost. If you work in customer service and you have to deal with customers, it's a punishment, and you're poorly compensated because, wages are not fantastic. And it's just like a gruesome job where you're just listening to people angry and shouting at you the entire time. In my mind, I'm thinking, perhaps this is such a customer forward position, or you're a direct representation of the company in that moment, maybe sometimes the only human interaction that your customers have with your brand. Shouldn't it maybe be the opposite as to where customer service representatives should be more highly compensated or even be more senior positions and not entry level or high turnover jobs?
That is harder to say. Of course, I would love for everybody to be paid more that is in customer service because I know what a tough job it is. Unfortunately, economically, the jobs we think should be paid well often aren't. It's just the nature of market dynamics, teachers, things like that, right?
Yeah.
But here's what I would say even before we got to pay is leadership has a role in making that stereotype go away. And let's just talk about two dynamics. One, the one we've already spoken about, which is, are they giving the agents the tools and resources they need to solve customer issues? Because if I just say, I use an example in one of my keynote speeches of basic training in the military, right? And obviously the stakes are much higher in the military, but I'm not going to tell you to go rush the hill until I've trained you on how to do that.
Right.
And given you the materials and supplies you need to do that well. And it's the same thing in customer service, which is you got to give them the tools, you got to give them the resources. And the job isn't as hard when you have that. And the second thing is this. The greatest ROI in all of customer experience is a difficult situation that is prevented before it ever starts. And leadership and management has a direct hand through designing the experience, through investing resources in the correct places, in preventing escalation and preventing issues from happening in the first place. And if you just fix those two things, just putting pay aside, which is a serious issue to discuss, if leadership just focused on those two things, that job, that meme, that, funny YouTube video about the nightmare of being a customer service rep could change a lot.
And do you think that people that are on the job mostly feel like this is something that I'm going to do temporarily because I have to pay bills, but the first opportunity I get, I am out of here? And is that sort of how people come to work? I mean, I'm asking you because you work a lot with customer service, and I feel like you deal with this more than I do. Is that something that executives and leaders see, where people just hate their jobs and hate coming into work? So aside from the training and the knowledge, they still have to kind of encourage and inspire and rev everybody up and give people pep talks like, come on, guys, we can do this. Is that something that happens?
Yeah, I mean, so the pep talks devoid of the action is not very effective. Let's talk about just generating enthusiasm for the team, right? And that's a cultural thing. And first of all, yes, with any type of entry level or sort of one step above entry level type job, you will have, no matter what, a percentage of people who are just taking it because they need the job. And your job as a leader is to have a team and a culture where the right people rise to the top, and the people that aren't right for that fit, hopefully sooner than later, figure it out. That's easier said than done. I'm making it sound really easy. It's not, but it is still the goal. It's the objective you want. But I think when you're talking about that enthusiasm and the sort of rah-rah stuff, That's okay as long as you are supporting it, in the practical operational sense. So one of the things I say is, and that's when I talk about customer experience leadership, put your money where your message is, which is, if you want customer experience, well, you better not just be incentivizing sales. You better be incentivizing customer experience. If you want your contact center team to not be the meme of, horrible customer service job, well, you better create an environment in which they are able to thrive, at least within the context of that job role. You need to empower them. You need to not give them metrics that are in direct contravention to the behaviors you expect. There's a lot of things a leader can do to make it better. And I really do think it does come down to leadership.
No, I agree, Adam. And I think we're also, if we expand out, we were talking a little bit here about customer service reps, but if we think about frontline, frontline goes into a lot of well-paying jobs. You think about flight attendants or people that work in hotels. They're not making minimum wage. They're being relatively well compensated. When you're talking about training and giving tools to folks that are on the front line, you're considering it in the broad sense, like not just the people that are getting, the 1-800 number, and complaining, but you're thinking scoping this as everybody that's touching customers right across the whole journey.
Yeah, I'll take it even further. That's a great point, James. I'll take it even a step further and say it's not even just front lines, it's customer facing, which means, one of the things when I do trainings is I talk to management first, and I ask who from management, not necessarily upper management, but who that is supervising the frontline supervisors, who of they are going to be in the training. Because if you're not the most customer-centric person on your team, if you're not one of the most skilled people in issue resolution on your team, and you're leading the people you expect to do well, you're going to have a challenge, right? So I think, to your point, it's not just the contact centers, it's anybody that's customer-facing at any level of the organization. I mentioned I come from small business, third-generation entrepreneur. I took those calls for a long time, and the calls I took were really, really bad. Because by the time it got to me, right, I had some really good people trying to resolve it before it got to me. So if it got to me, it was sort of a mess, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have those skills so that your team knows. So it's at all levels.
And have you seen, Adam, as well, when you've been engaging with some of these companies in training, have you seen some sort of marked differences and the impact and ROI of really focusing? Because one of the key messages I'm taking away is focus here, making it a strategic priority, investing in giving your customer-facing teams the tools that they need to handle these interactions in the right way, right? To de-escalate and all those sort of things. Have you seen in the work that you do when companies have made it a strategic priority, have you seen a shift in the way that customers are acting and the metrics, and this stuff works when you really focus on it?
100%. And I will say this, it works when you make it a cultural change that is reinforced over time.
Okay.
Right. So I'll be frank, and I'll save all of your listeners their money as well. Neither I nor anyone else ever born can come fix, quote unquote, your customer service in a one-day workshop.
Yeah,
okay?
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Let me just tell you now, it's the first thing I say when I get on the phone, and I tell them, if somebody tells you they can, run.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I can do in a one-day workshop. Here's what I can do in a follow-up program. Here's what I can do mixing in virtual learning or virtual trainings after the fact. Here's what you need to do, or none of it matters. In the end, no outside, unless you're bringing them in and they're going to be like full-time and basically be a job role in your organization, no outside consultant can make a cultural change for you, because it's all about how you lead and the focus you put on these investments and making it a strategic priority, as we're talking about. And I was very fortunate. I don't think I'm allowed to speak about it publicly yet, because I just found out I haven't even spoken to my client. But one of my clients just got like best in customer service in Newsweek or something.
Oh, awesome.
For their industry. So it was really cool. So I got to follow up with them. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, it works if you work it, right? The old cliche. It really does, but it can't be an initiative. It can't be the flavor of the month. It has to be a true cultural change in creating a customer-centric culture.
If you're tired of empty metrics and KPIs that have little or no correlation to your bottom line, your ROI, and your growth, it might be time to try something better. Worthix tells you why your customers are choosing to buy from you or not. So don't wait until your business becomes the next Toys R Us. Change at the speed of the new market by knowing if your brand is worth it. Learn more at worthix.com.
Well, Adam, without giving up all the tricks of the trade, because I know that this is what you do for a living, but what is the one thing that you try to get across to companies when you get in there to work on projects and to work on these trainings and these workshops? What is one thing that you think companies cannot do without?
Ooh, one thing.
The one message that you give across the board that must be instilled into the company's culture.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been instilled in the culture, but I think the one thing I tell to leaders is don't assume that your team knows what to do.
Good message.
Okay. In every situation, don't assume they know what to do in the way you want it done.
Right.
Now, I go in and I've had people, like, literally my training was their first day of work. And then they're sitting next to somebody who's been with the company 20 years. And sometimes these are higher level people that have been in business to business sales. I mean, these are people that know a lot about how to talk to customers and, are advanced already. And you get a mixture, and assuming that the person whose first day of work is that day knows what that 20-year person knows, assuming that and managing that way is often one of the biggest flaws. And people don't do it intentionally. Like, if intellectually you talk to them and say, do you think the 20-year person and the one-day person have the same skill set? Of course not. But when they're in the day-to-day rush, the flowing rapids of business, right? They just act as if it is true. They manage as if it is true. And stepping back and remembering that your team needs the tools and the resources to truly deliver, excellent, or what we call hero class customer experience, is incredibly important.
I know that one of the workshops that you do is on the psychology of communication, and it involves a little bit of neuroscience. And neuroscience is something that's like a personal favorite topic of mine. And I'm like borderline obsessed with it, because I just think it's incredible how through studying and understanding human behavior, we can predict the outcome of customer experiences and somehow design those experiences beforehand. So we get to control the outcome. Of course, there are exceptions, right? But in general, if we stick to it, that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, right? Controlling the outcome of the customer experience. Now, what are some of the things that you teach and that you try to get across through this workshop?
So one of the ways I'm looking at it, and I think it is truly fascinating. I agree with you, Mary, that it's just something that has captivated me. And in the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time really asking the question, how does this apply to customer experience and customer service? Because I think, and tell me since you're into this, if you'd agree with me, so much of the work that's been done in this area, especially before the last couple of years, has been in the sales and the influence side, right? This all began with Cialdini's influence.
Right.
And I think there's been a lot less application to customer experience. So that's one of the things I've been exploring. I know a few other of my colleagues have been exploring. And one of the areas I've really honed in on, but the research isn't there. I'm more at the stage where I'm hypothesizing. If we apply this principle X here to this situation Y, what would happen? In theory, it should work. We don't have the data to know. So for instance, there was a great article called "The Most Dangerous Word in the World." You know what that is?
Yeah.
N-O, no. And essentially they did research and said, just hearing the word no, and I don't even like saying it to tell the story, gives you a release of fight or flight of your stress chemicals, cortisol, all that. They just flash the word no, and they have, MRI imaging now so they can see what's happening in the brain. That's what's making this stuff so fascinating. Just flashing that word had dozens of stress chemicals released. Now, we've known since Dale Carnegie, it's not a great word.
Right.
Use positive language, not negative language. But now we know really how important it is. Now we know, hey, you know what? Let's take this word out of almost anything we can. And that's something that's okay, what does that really mean? If you put it in a sample set of 10,000 emails, and then you did a control study of 10,000 emails with the word, and we don't really know if that is proven, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest it would be an accurate way to approach it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm sort of playing with some of these ideas, like taking these ideas from influence and from, the research in these areas and saying, okay, if we apply it to customer experience, what does that look like?
So it's the direct correlation of the use of certain words during any sort of customer service job that generates maybe feelings of anxiety or feelings of aggression in customers, therefore causing them to have a negative perception of your brand.
The classic book is named Influence, right? It's not a press a button, get a result kind of thing. It's an influence that if you have 100 people, it may move 60 people more in that direction somewhat, right? None of this is, a process by which you get a defined result. So it doesn't have to be negative, though. It doesn't have to be words to avoid. You've heard of priming, obviously, I guess, if you're into this stuff, right? So that idea of they did the bingo test, right? They had people shuffling letters. They were college students. One group had a sort of a generic set, and the other group had a set of words that prime the idea of elderly, like bingo and Florida, which I take offense to because I'm so these are young college students, all healthy. And, of course, the experiment wasn't the experiment. It never is. The experiment was they timed them walking down the hall when they left. And the ones that had been primed with the elderly words actually walked slower.
Yeah.
Right. And they've done a lot of other priming kind of things and anchoring effect and things like that. So here's the question I start posing, which is this. Can we use that with a difficult customer situation? Can we use that in a tough email? Can we purposely add words like cooperation, understanding, and prime these ideas? Is that going to magically solve things? No,
right.
But over a sample set, these are the questions I'm trying to ask. We really need the data to study it. What happens? Does that, out of 1,000 samples, does that turn 100 of them? And can we be strategic with our word choice and use these principles? I mean, I'm using it anyways in my own work, and I'm teaching it to clients, but I'm also letting them know, hey, this is a theory, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, I'm with you on that theory. I'm all for it. And, we see this a lot when we study customer emotions and how we can link these words to emotions and how emotions control things, really crucial things to organizations like loyalty and churn, which is, I know, something that you discuss a lot of as well, right? If we look at a lot of concepts, psychological concepts that we talk about all the time on this podcast, like the peak end rule, for example, and like the idea of designing experiences and creating positive peaks and endings to somehow try to make the customer's takeaway or their memories be remarkable and be wonderful, right?
Absolutely.
And this is something that I'm a huge fan. Once again, it's still kind of in the initial stages. Although it's been studied for a while, there's still not that much concrete evidence about it. But I still believe that it's helpful. Is this something that you encounter and you work with? Do you see companies actually trying to apply these concepts into their experiences and their customer journeys?
I think so. And a lot more people are talking, I'm a little bit out on the front edge with the language stuff and the NeuroWords idea. a lot of people are talking about peak and rule, including myself. And I think more companies are certainly accepting of customer emotion now. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the emotional journey for the past few years. And one of the sort of different lenses I've taken on that is, and I think you've seen this because we've talked about this, the speeches I do, is the idea of hassle-free, the idea of preventing customer hassle. That is actually not just, hassle-free to be hassle-free because it sounds good and we just assume everyone hates hassle, right? It's actually about customer emotion. And it's about the idea that you have to prevent negative emotion in order to facilitate positive emotion. Okay, if you're going to have a peak emotion, right? Well, you have to not only manufacture or generate that great moment, you've got to make sure you don't create another one somewhere else that's worse and is negative.
It's probably more important even than generating the positive one is the lack of negative emotion, right?
Exactly. 100%. Because that, I mean, when you think about it, one of the ways I explain it is, if you and I are married or whatever, right, we have a 10-year relationship. Well, there's a lot of room for deep emotion and multi-layered complex emotions, right? You can be mad at your spouse and still love them and think they're awesome, right?
Right.
With companies, there's not that much room, okay? There's not a lot of room for those layers. You know, if a customer's upset with you, I mean, you may have a long relationship where they just really love you, but on the average, on the whole, if they're upset with you, they're not thinking about the positives, right? It's crowding out the positive emotions. And certainly it's probably dominating their emotion, their memory of the experience, as we discussed, and all of those things. And you don't have the ability to make that positive connection as well or as poignantly if you haven't either prevented, preferably, but resolved the negative emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and we've talked about this in some previous episodes. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this from your perspective, this idea of delighting customers, and should the focus be creating these amazing moments, and these are the things that people really remember, and this should be what we strive for, or, and it doesn't have to be an or, it could be an and or, but also ensuring that we have consistency in what we do rather than trying to have these spike moments of amazing experiences. Just make sure that people can have consistency and we don't drop the ball and we always deliver it and be more sort of sustainable rather than strive for these moments of delight. I'd love to get your thoughts on this in relation to this idea of emotional experiences.
So I tell a couple of stories in my keynotes about amazing customer experiences, the spikes, right?
Yeah.
And one of the messages I put with them is stories do not scale. Okay. The stories I tell probably can't be done for one of them definitely can't be done for every customer. That can't be done for most customers. It's not about trying to create those delight moments. I think those are important, but they should always just be moments of seized opportunity. They should not be a strategic focus because you will fail. You simply can't do it for every customer.
Right.
So the real question is, what does the baseline consistent experience look like? What does every customer experience no matter what? And surprise and delight doesn't have to be these big viral moments. It can just be a really nice piece of communication, right? It can just be they asked about, how your dog was doing that you mentioned last time you came in the bank. Right. It doesn't have to be the ATM that spits out, which that was a PR move, but you know what I mean? The ATM that spits out the president and things like that. Right. I mean, this kind of crazy stuff. I mean, one of the stories I tell is about a hotel that heard me mention my wife's birthday when we booked the reservation 2 months ago and had a whole spread on the bed when we arrived there. They can't do that for everyone, but they happen to know about our birthday and were able to seize the opportunity and make that moment great. And we always remembered it, and et cetera, et cetera. But the key is, if you have that baseline, if every experience is good and consistently good, then when those moments arise, they just mean that much more. But if you try to make them a strategic focus, it can be really tough. Now, if you can make something that's like a little extra, like the DoubleTree cookie, a strategic focus, that's a little more scalable.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I think is very difficult as well for companies, James is going to tell me not to say Chewy.
Everyone loves Chewy.
Just bring it up. Get it over with.
Well, the DoubleTree cookie is also on there, James, as the top mention. Well, it's I find it very interesting how consistently these names come up. I think it just takes this point home, which is these companies are constantly brought up as examples because they are so consistent in delivering incredible experiences. And they managed to create this own like word of mouth viral reputation for themselves by simply being consistent, right? Which is probably the most important part of everything that they do, right?
Yo, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, what you get is companies who either fail horrendously at it, and companies that are, somehow they've understood that they've got an issue and they're working hard to try to fix that. And this is something that I did want to bring up because I read an article of yours from your blog that talks a little bit about Comcast. And Comcast, for those who are listeners on the show, Comcast is the opposite of Chewy because it always comes up as the bad experience. And they're an easy target, and I'm not going to bully them, and I'm not going to take advantage of, oh my God, it's so easy to bash Comcast. But what I did want to talk about was how you had a firsthand experience in seeing how Comcast is trying to turn this around. Now, I know that there are a lot of brands out there that have successfully transformed their experiences to now be memorable and be market leaders in having excellent customer service. And one that I wanted to bring up was T-Mobile. I'm 34, and when I came into the market, T-Mobile had already had established this wonderful reputation of being extremely customer-centric. But from what I understand, it wasn't always this way. I've heard people talking about how T-Mobile was actually really well known for being one of the worst services in the industry, that they were like the standard of bad for a really long time. And somehow they managed to change this. They managed to get in there and change their branding and change their campaigns and change the way they do things so that the customer all of a sudden came top of mind. So what is it that brands can do? How do they bounce back from bad reputations of customer experience? So companies that are the opposite of DoubleTree, the opposite of Chewy, companies that are known for being really bad. Is there salvation? Is there fixing it?
That's the perfect pitch, Mary. Thank you so much, because the title of the blog post I wrote about my experience at Comcast was "It's Never Too Late to Win with Customer Experience."
You're welcome.
Thank you. It's just it's like putting it on the tee for me. I appreciate it. And I should say there's a caveat to that, and we won't go down this little side road. I'll just mention it. In the post, I explored the idea that it's really only never too late for a healthy company to win with customer experience. There's a point at which it is too late. But if they're healthy, if they still have profitability and solid customers and solid products, absolutely can. And that's going to Comcast was really fascinating. And I'll talk about the customer experience side. I think there is a PR side to this, a branding side that's not really as much my area. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. None of that matters if you don't turn around the customer experience ship, right? If you're known for bad customer service, you're not going to change that through a PR campaign.
No. You can kick off your change in customer experience through a PR campaign. So like try to convince people to give you a second chance through the PR campaign, but then you do have to deliver, right?
Agreed, but I think that should be down the road. And here's why. Comcast, back when it happened, I wrote a few articles about them at the time. And one of them was basically the picture on the blog post is like a container ship. Mm-hmm. Because that, if you look at there's even a diagram of how a container ship turns, it's like a big thing, right? And that was really the metaphor I'd use for how hard it's going to be to turn a culture that size.
Right.
Tens and tens of thousands of employees, right? That is a monster undertaking. And why I say I think the PR and the branding can happen later. And they just said, hey, we're going to fix this. We're doing this. We're putting a bunch of money in it. And then they sort of went about doing it. If you try to go sell it, it doesn't turn around. If you try to go sell that the ship has turned around and you're in, the first 3% of that turn, well, everyone's going to say, oh, no, you still suck.
Right.
Hey, and we were joking beforehand. I got the stuff first. All right. So yeah, I agree. You can absolutely be a branding and a sort of PR push, but you better have your ducks in a row before you do that. So let's talk about getting the ducks in the row. Comcast did the most important thing you can do. They actually meant it when they said it and put the money and budget and resources into doing it. Now, you can mess up, you can go down bad paths, you can invest poorly when you're trying to do this. That's going to happen to any company that does it. What the big differentiator is, and I mentioned this earlier, put your money where your message is, was they invested for real, like crazy money in this turnaround. I mean, like budgets that, are bigger than like another 30 companies, right? I mean, just insane because they're so big. But they put the money where the message is. They've invested in it. And, it's truly interesting to see a lot of the stuff they're doing. I mean, they're obviously using technology. They're a technology-based company. They're using that in a lot of ways to innovate, but they are also working on the nuts to bolts, human to human, the stuff we talked about earlier, interactions as well. Things like just if your person doesn't show up at your house in the window, you get a bill credit. And the window is narrower now. It's like down to 2 hours. And I don't know if it's in every market or what, they're so big, I can't really generalize some of these things, but that's one of the things they're doing. Like, so a narrower window, that's a pain point that's been reduced. And you actually get a credit if they don't make it.
Right.
They put their money where their message is. And that's just one example. So I think any company can do that. To your point, T-Mobile, whoever, it's never really too late to win with customer experience as long as you still have a healthy business.
Imagine being able to pinpoint precisely why your customer chose you over your competition or didn't. How much easier would it be to create growth strategies, secure budget funding, and improve customer experiences? This is what Worthix can deliver through its auto-adaptive AI survey. So stop focusing on what and when and start understanding why your customers buy at worthix.com.
It wasn't really mysterious. Everybody knew what the main problems were with Comcast. But like you said, when you have a dinosaur, it's really difficult to actually make changes because it involves so much on such a large scale, right? So, as a Comcast customer, as someone who's had so many problems with Comcast, honestly, I'm cheering for them. I'm rooting for them. I hope they're able to do it because, first of all, I think I'm going to benefit most of all as their customer. And secondly, because it's going to give me really, something wonderful to blog about and talk about when the changes do. But I do think it's important because it seems like they are doing their research. They are listening to their customers. They're taking that step and finding out what the main problems are, the issues that actually make people cancel. What is it that drives churn? What is it that drives loyalty? And let's focus on the things that truly are causing customers not only to be unhappy, but to cancel or to take their business elsewhere. Right. And, that window of having people come over, that's a really big deal. That's something that really makes Comcast lose business. So it makes me quite happy, actually, to hear that they're investing in changing that.
Yeah, I think an important thing to remember that a lot of people forget, they're like, oh, well, this is, this, they haven't changed this, haven't changed that. They're not only doing all the things I mentioned, they're doing it in the face of an upheaval in part of their core business.
Right.
Right. I mean, cord cutting. It's just, that's a huge, that's one of the reasons cable companies, forget Comcast, all cable companies have been ranked near the bottom of every customer service industry survey, ACSI, whatever it may be, for a long time because they had captive customers.
Yeah.
They didn't have to be nice. They could still make a whole bunch. In fact, they made more money not being nice. I would argue they probably didn't if they really had understood what preventing bad experiences can do for your bottom line. But they certainly saw it that way. And they certainly made more short-term money that way because customer experience is an investment. But now they're having to do this turn. They're, let's say they're turning that big ship around where they're doing it during a tropical storm.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that easy.
No, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and this weekend we stayed at a hotel, and there was cable, and her reaction was, "Why are there breaks for commercials?" Like she's from a generation that does not tolerate that. This is like a big no. She's like, "What is happening?" So, this is what they're waging against. This is what they're up against. A generation that absolutely rejects the core of their business.
Interesting.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. A huge, Comcast is very diversified, but that is a huge point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adam, I had just a thought as you're talking through the Comcast story and thinking about what clients often grapple with. What role does metrics have in this process in getting people measured against the right things or the things that we know, drive behavioral change if they do? What have you seen in your experience and where that fits in the in the priorities as you're thinking about setting up strategic priorities and getting this more ingrained in the culture, getting the right metrics in place, and maybe sometimes they don't have the right metrics in place. And what role does it play? Is it significant, or is it just one of those things that's less important?
That's a hard way to phrase it. I'll say this, because the metrics themselves aren't really important. The purpose of the metrics can be incredibly important.
Right.
Metrics are a tool, and they're often a misused tool is the problem. They are nothing more than that. They should never be the goal of customer experience. They should never be, the true focus of a customer experience program. They should be a tool for analyzing the progress of a customer experience program. And you do need them. And the bigger you are, the more you need them, right? Because you just simply, when you're talk about Comcast, what are they going to do? Do 50,000 anecdotal surveys and put them together? No, they got to have some numbers to figure out what's happening, right? It's just not going to happen. So the question is, what metrics do you choose? That's really the crux of it, James. What are the ones that give us the end result we're looking for? And that is truly the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Then is implementing them and not becoming metric blind, right? I mean, NPS, we all know NPS, right? It's the most popular customer service metric. NPS has a lot of problems. Most of the problems from NPS are how people use it, though.
Right.
They're not a problem of the actual metric. That's no one metric's perfect. I would never recommend one metric anyways. But the great majority of the problems with NPS are the fact that it's not used well. It's just used at this end all. I've been in organizations. I've worked with organizations. I've talked to clients where they're like, oh yeah, our NPS has done this and done that. And I dig into the program. I was like, okay, well, here's the 7 ways I can tell you probably have people cheating the system already, because it's all about the number, and there's a lot of ways to cheat it, right?
Sure.
It's just so easy. That's how, we talked about the psychology and human nature. It's so easy to just look at the one number, right? Because everything else is messy and difficult.
It makes sense, Adam. And I was thinking too about frontline, just coming back to where we started in frontline. I was wondering also about measures within sort of performance management as well. And if you're talking about training and trying to arm teams with better information, I was wondering also about in the performance management process, if you change the way performance is measured of the people that are interacting with customers, does that have a significant impact in the way they behave? That's what I was trying to get at. Or whether that's not really significant. It's more about arming them with the tools and, role modeling or role playing, et cetera.
Yeah, they're hugely important. And they're more important in a negative sense than in a positive sense to me.
Okay.
In other words, often it's not completely true. I mean, metrics can be used positively in management.
Gotcha.
And should
Yeah. Gotcha.
I'm just saying that more often they're screwing things up. Managers are screwing things up with metrics, right?
Right.
Okay, because they're focused on the numbers because they're easy. It's easier than having a discussion about how you phrase things on the phone. And also because here's the real problem. The people who are managing, the people who are supervising, they didn't come up with which metrics to measure. Their boss did.
Right.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We always forget that, right? I mean, You're like, I don't want to do first call resolution, or I don't want to only do first call resolution. I don't want to do, average handle time, because now all my people are rushing off the phone and everyone's calling back, right? But that's what was set from on high, and not in a way that gave anybody flexibility, and not in a way that gave them the ability to look at the experience as a whole. The key is figuring out which metrics really matter, and then understanding the unintended consequences of those metrics. Average handle time is going to be speed. Speed's fine, but you got to balance it with something else. Otherwise, everybody rushes off the phone.
Yeah.
Right.
Unintended consequences sometimes of these metrics.
I like that. Adam, we're super out of time because we went super far over. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. We're so lucky to have you and to listen to your message and your methods and everything that you're bringing to this community to improve customer experience and customer service. So thank you so much for being on. If our listeners want to follow you and want to hear more from you, how can they reach you?
Well, first of all, Mary James, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing with this podcast to spread the message of CX. You can reach me at customersthatstick.com. That's my home base. I'm all over social media and all that, but customersthatstick.com is absolutely the best way to find me. And we've got a lot of great content on there, and obviously everything we do for customers.
And I recommend that blog because I subscribe to it and it's great.
Yeah, thanks,
so thank you so much,
Cheers.
Adam. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for joining us on one more episode of Voices of Customer Experience. This podcast is hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, edited and co-produced by Nick Gomez and Steve Barry. This podcast was brought to you by Worthix. Discover your worth at worthix.com.